Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel and thank you for joining me for another true crime video. Today I bring you a story about a woman who has been called many things, most notably the Soapmaker of Correggio, but she's also been called Italy's first serial killer. And the Italian Sweeney Todd, but her actual name was Leonarda Chianchuaeli. So, without giving too much away right at the beginning, but I have to let you know a little bit, but I don't want to give away the whole story. Leonarda killed 3 women she knew. Some of them she was actually very close friends with, and she made their blood into tea cakes that were meant to be consumed and were in fact consumed. And she made their bodies into soap that was meant to be washed with and was washed with. Now, of course, there's much more to this story. There has to be, right? And we will certainly talk about all of it. I mean, there have been movies and plays written about this woman and her crimes, and I think her story is so interesting and fascinating to people, mainly because it's very difficult to pick out the villain. It's hard to point at a specific person or a specific event and say, this is who we blame, or this is when it started. And I find, personally, that the most interesting stories are the ones where you can't necessarily figure out who the bad guy is. I know we have said it in other cases before, but here it is more important than ever to go back, way back into time, because to understand what happened at the end, we have to go back to the beginning. And our beginning in this case starts not with the birth of Leonarda, but with the birth of her mother, Amelia Dinolfi. But before we get started, let's have a word from the sponsor of today's video, GlassesUSA.com. I'm sure by now, if you've been watching a while, you've noticed I have several pairs of glasses, and I've gotten them all from GlassesUSA.com, and I will never return to the old ways of going to the glasses store and, looking through all these frames on the wall while all these other people are milling around, and maybe you got kids you're trying to corral and keep busy while you're trying to pick out a pair of glasses, and you got to try them on, and then you do pick one, and then you give it to the guy or the girl, and then they're like, we'll call you in your glasses already, and then you got to come back out and pick them up. Oh, it was the worst. And also, personally, I felt like I could only even get a new pair of glasses once every 2 years because they were so expensive. By cutting out the middleman, GlassesUSA.com offers prescription glasses at up to 70% off retail prices. Now you can shop for prescription eyewear online at affordable prices without leaving your home, and you can enjoy free shipping right to your doorstep. With GlassesUSA.com, you can add any type of prescription to almost any pair of frames, including sunglasses, which I personally need prescription sunglasses because I am blind and I cannot be driving around without prescription glasses on. And while we're talking about glasses and frames, Glasses USA has a ton to choose from, a ton of frames. They offer over 6,000 styles of eyeglasses and sunglasses, including in-house brands like Muse or Amelia E, both of which I love, both of which I own several pairs of glasses from Muse and Amelia E. But they also have designer brands like Ray-Ban, Oakley, Armani, Gucci, and so much more. The website is really helpful as well when searching for glasses because you can search by color and shape, which I often find myself doing. And they have all types of glasses, including kids' glasses, sports glasses, protective glasses. GlassesUSA.com is also the perfect place to stock up and save on contact lenses. You get 25% off all contact lens brands like AccuView and Dailies, and they're available with any prescription and for all uses, such as daily, weekly, or monthly. You might think going into a store is better because you actually get to try the glasses on and see if you like them, but Glasses USA has something called a virtual mirror on their website, which allows you to upload a picture of yourself and try on as many frames as you want, and the price cannot be beat. You can get a complete pair of glasses, frames included, frames and lenses, for just $30. Free basic prescription lenses are included with every frame, so you can see why I have more than one pair of glasses, because it's just so much more affordable. And glasses used to be something that I hated, and it was like a necessity, but now I feel like wearing glasses is something that I can do to show my personality and accessorize. I like making glasses fun again. There are some glasses that you all don't see me wear often because lighting for like the video plus glasses is always a tricky thing to maneuver. So some of my favorite frames rarely make an appearance in my videos because some of my favorite frames are the bigger ones, the chunkier ones, the more different looking ones, but they do cast a shadow on my face. And I know that this can be distracting for some people, because you've told me that, but I do want to show you a few of those pairs now. And then I guess we'll see which one casts the least amount of shadow on my face, and I'll wear those for the rest of the video. All right, so these ones are the Amelia E. Sylvia. They're so cute. I love these, and I think they're really flattering for my face shape, which is pretty much just round. I also have two pairs of green glasses that I love. One you saw me wearing earlier in this video. These ones right here, and these are the Muse times Hilary Duff Zora. I love this color. I love the big chunky frames. I love that they look different. I love that I can put these on without makeup or anything and I still don't look like I just rolled out of bed and didn't try. And lastly, we have the Muse Kylie. Now I have this frame in several different colors, this kind of design frame or style of frame. I have them in blue, red, and then green. And I think it's such a great frame because it's lightweight. It's so light. You don't even feel like you have glasses on, but it's also sturdy. And I love how I can interchange the different colors because I have 3 different pairs with what I'm wearing or, what my eye makeup looks like, etc. And I think that these are going to be the glasses I wear today because from what I can see on my screen here, these are the least shadowy. Still shadowy. Usually I'll wear something like this, a thinner frame when I'm recording because they cast a very little shadow. See? Maybe I'll put these back on. But I love all my Glasses USA glasses. These are also from Glasses USA. Every pair you ever see me put on is from Glasses USA, and you can find the links to all of these glasses in the description box because I know people are always asking, which glasses were you wearing in that video? Which glasses were you wearing in that video? You can always find the links in the description box. If you do choose to purchase from Glasses USA, you will find that shopping with them online means a risk-free experience, free shipping and returns, and 100% money-back guarantee if you don't absolutely love your glasses, but you will. Thank you so much to Glasses USA for sponsoring this video. Thank you to all of you out there who understand that sponsors are essential to this channel, but also understand that I love my sponsors so much that sometimes I do ramble on a bit about them and I kind of talk longer than I should about them because I really do appreciate them and love them and, support what they're doing, and I wouldn't tell you about them if I didn't. But let's dive back into the video now. So Leonarda Chianchuaeli's mother, Amelia Dinolfi, was born in a quaint southern Italian town called Montella in the province of Avellino. Now, from what I can tell, this was a very pretty place to live, as is, much of Italy. It's gorgeous. It's surrounded by mountains, just a lot of nature, and it's known today for its chestnuts, since this area's terrain, altitude, and volcanic soil are ideal for growing Palomino chestnuts. Now, I was talking to my dad about this case. My dad's Italian. He actually immigrated here, I believe, in the 60s, but he was like, oh, they're also known for their wine, because anytime you talk about any place on earth, my dad will tell you what wine they're known for. So I'm sorry, I love my dad. He's awesome. So Amelia came from a very good family. They were well off. They had a good, place in the social status. And they had a great deal of influence and respect in the upper echelons of Montella society, where they ran. And as Amelia grew from a child into a young lady, no one could deny her great beauty, and her parents were grateful for this, that she was growing up beautiful, since they knew, combined with their status and her good looks, she would be able to land herself a great husband who could care for her and keep her in the comfortable life she was accustomed to. Now, a lot of this is going to sound outdated, and dare I say it, even sexist to you, and I get it completely. But it sounds outdated because this was the late 1800s. And even if you're not a history buff, you still probably know that women in those times were not expected to do much more than make a suitable match and become good wives and mothers. And Amelia and her parents could only hope that she would find a kind man who was wealthy so that she could become the lady of a grand home, have babies to carry on her husband's name, and live a comfortable life, picking out fabrics for drapes, choosing china patterns, and entertaining her friends in her sitting room that has the drapes that she picked out the fabrics for. Now, this would have been considered the best possible outcome and really her only good option. And as she reached the age where she would be accepting suitors, it seemed that all of this would be well within her reach, since many of the young men from good families began lining up to court her. What is courting? Well, Amelia was born about at the end of the Victorian period, kind of going into the Edwardian period. But if you're familiar with the rules of courtship in Victorian England, which I think has the most media exposure and has had the most portrayals in, modern media, it was pretty much the same thing. A young lady of the upper class could not pursue a husband on her own. She couldn't even introduce herself to a man. Until her society debut, she would allow her parents to work behind the scenes and possibly and hopefully arrange a good marriage for her. But if nothing was arranged, she would be introduced to society or be given her debut at a fairly young age, usually before the age of 18. And this was mainly because the average life expectancy at that time was 45 years old. And also because mortality rates in babies born at this time were not great. Many babies would die before reaching adulthood. So the sooner she was hitched, the sooner she could pop out some babies, hopefully give her husband an heir, maybe even a spare. A young girl's debut would happen only after she had completed her education. And when I say education, I don't mean math and science, because a woman at that time had no need for such things. She might be taught, however, to speak several languages. She would be proficient on more than one instrument. She would be able to sing, or she would at least be taught to sing. She should be able to paint in both oil and watercolors, mind you, not one, but both. She would have mad needlepoint skills, and also she would be taught to be a gracious hostess and homemaker. Once she'd made her debut in society, she could accept suitors who would usually visit with her at her own home. They'd bring her flowers or gifts, or promenade with her about the streets, or dance with her at balls and parties, but always under the supervision of a chaperone. A young woman and her suitor, or any young man, could never meet alone because that would be scandalous. And if it got out, her virtue could and probably would be considered ruined. So Amelia was at a party one evening with one of her potential suitors, a chaperoned party, of course, at the home of friends to her family. She'd had a great night dancing and chatting away, and when she left the gated estate, she felt that she would like to walk home this evening, since it was a mild summer night and she didn't live far. Unbeknownst to young, naive Amelia, she was being watched. And this was not the first time that this someone who was watching her had fixed her in his gaze. Mariano Chianchuaeli was an unemployed man who came from a poor family in Montella, and it's reported that he was an older man who had the tendency to waste his time drinking and doing a lot of nothing. He had a reputation for not only being a lazy layabout, but also for being cruel. Now, his exact age is never given, and Amelia's exact age is never given. But I did take a little trip down Ancestry.com, and I tracked down the family tree of Mariano. So what I found out was that Mariano was born in 1854. His records say that he was also married at one point to a woman named Serafina in 1881. It's confusing, to say the least, because when you go into Amelia Dinolfi's Ancestry.com, and I checked multiple sites, it doesn't give her year of birth. And a lot of these sites list this Serafina woman as Leonarda's mother, but that's not true. Serafina and Mariano had 2 children together, but neither of them were Leonarda. But from what I got looking at the dates and kind of comparing, it seemed like Amelia was probably between 16 and 19 years old, and Mariano was probably pushing into his 40s. Now, this lecherous fool had seen Amelia around town before. As many other men, he couldn't help but notice her incredible beauty and youth, and he was attracted to her. But he was also resentful of her because he was aware that in the social strata, the social society, a man of his background and class would never be able to even be considered a potential suitor for her. So he would never even be put in front of her. Because, all these suitors, all these men, they get vetted before they're even allowed to talk to the young woman that they want to marry. He was well aware that she was out of his reach, and he didn't like that. He desperately wanted to knock her off her pedestal. So on this lovely summer night, Mariano had followed her to the estate, and he'd waited outside, chugging a bottle of cheap wine until he saw her emerge. He then followed her, grabbed her, and pulled her into a field off the street. Now, typically, I don't give trigger warnings in these videos, and I get some flack for it because people are, you should give a trigger warning. But as far as I'm concerned, this is a true crime channel. I talk about true crime, and that includes things like murders and, horrible things. So that's typically why I don't give a trigger warning, because I'd be giving one at the beginning of every episode. And I feel like if you're here at the True Crime Channel, you probably know that it's not going to be all sunshine and rainbows. But for this, I am going to give a trigger warning, simply because I think it's just the right thing to do in this situation. So what is going to follow is not going to be an excessive amount of, information or details about rape, but we are going to be discussing rape. And I know that this can sometimes be incredibly difficult for people who have had past experiences with sexual abuse, sexual assault, things like that. So if this is not the video for you, then you should click out. Like I said, I'm always going to be respectful. I'm always going to just tell what I need to in order for the story to proceed. I'm not going to go into any gruesome details, but of course, some details can't be helped but to be given. If I remember to, I will also put a timestamp in the description box. But, like I said, I think it's going to be okay. I'm going to try to be as respectful as possible. So, like I said, Amelia was young. And although she had probably been taught to play the harpsichord and sew buttons onto shirts, she had not been taught about sex. Parents would never dream of introducing this topic to their young daughters. Their daughters might become curious about what sex was, and then they would go out and try to find out on their own, and we cannot have that. They could just find out for themselves on their wedding nights when it was too late to do anything about it. Now, at first, Amelia thought she was the target of some prank being played on her by friends. Once she saw the man and he started grabbing at her dress and trying to put his hand up her skirts, she thought she was being robbed. And she begged him to stop. She said, "I don't have any money." She was too naive to realize that it wasn't money that this man wanted. She didn't know what was happening to her until it was too late. And even then, she didn't fully understand what was happening and what had happened, only that it hurt her. Afterwards, Mariano got up, left, and Amelia lay on the ground for hours in pain and confusion before getting up and walking home in a daze. I get the impression, from what I can tell, that she was so shocked. She kind of just went to bed, wearing the same clothes that she'd been wearing, not washing up, nothing, just fell into bed. And the next morning, she woke up and sort of put two and two together. She was in a massive amount of pain, and there was blood on her inner thighs and on her clothes. And she immediately felt shame. She was born in a religious time to a very religious family, and she felt that whatever had happened to her made her soiled and damaged in the eyes of God, and that she would be judged for it, not only by God, but by her family, her friends, her community. So she told no one. She cleaned herself up, she put on a smile, and she went about her life as if nothing had ever happened. But inside, she wrestled with this dark secret and the turmoil of emotions that this secret caused her day in and day out. She suffered with that alone and in silence. And I mean, Montella is not a huge town, it's not some metropolis, so she saw Mariano out and about. And every time she saw her attacker on the streets, at the market, in town, she relived it all over again. Now, a few months passed, and although Amelia noticed that she wasn't getting her period, she didn't really know what that meant, but her mother did. The ladies of the household, who were servants at that time, they knew what that meant. In those days, it would be all too clear to the household staff when a woman would get her monthly visitor because there weren't, handy things like period tracking apps or tampons. It kind of just came when it came, and it was usually a surprise that would leave, a mess in the bed sheets and on your clothes. So I suspect one of the staff, one of the women who came in and changed Amelia's sheets, told Amelia's mother that it had been months since they'd encountered these stains. And like I said, Amelia's mother knew what that meant. So Amelia's mother and father confronted her about it. They demanded to know which of her suitors had done this to her, which of those men had compromised her virtue and her future. But she had nothing to say. It was only when her father told her that he was going to go out and knock on the door of every single young man that she had entertained until he got to the bottom of it that she told her parents the truth about what had happened and when it had happened. Her parents did not call the police. Her father did not track down Mariano and smash his face in. No, they did none of that. Instead, Amelia's parents invited their daughter's rapist and his whole family over for dinner because they felt the only way this pregnancy would not destroy their reputation was if they made an honest woman out of Amelia. Now, the decision of what would happen was made amongst the adults, and that included Mariano, right? Because he's an adult, and Amelia is technically a child. And Amelia was the only one who didn't have a say in this. And that decision was that Amelia would marry her rapist at once, the sooner the better, preferably before she began to show anymore. Because when she started to show, people would start to talk. And Mariano could not have been more happy about this arrangement, right? This was the best possible outcome for him as far as he was concerned. He had done this absolutely terrible thing, and he was being rewarded for it. This pretty young girl, who he had so long resented because she was out of his league, he was being handed her on a silver platter. He had successfully not only brought her down a few pegs, but tied her to him for life. There was a hasty private wedding, and then Amelia packed her things and left her childhood home where she had servants and, possessions, fine possessions, nice things. And she moved in with Mariano into the poorest part of Montella, into what is called a hovel, which basically just means a small, squalid, unpleasant dwelling. And this hovel had not a stick of furniture in it, and she was going to be expected to use an outdoor bathroom that was shared with other people who lived on their street or in their area. Amelia had to leave her grand home and her grand dreams behind because Mariano still didn't have a job, and he had no plans to get one anytime soon because spending all day drinking was much easier. So Amelia was forced to marry and live with this man who she not only barely knew, who was an old drunk, and he probably smelled bad, allegedly, but who had also been responsible for the most painful and traumatic thing that had ever happened to her in her entire life. Becoming a married man did not suddenly infuse Mariano with kindness or civility. No, people don't change typically, especially when they suck. Their first night together as man and wife was what seemed like a never-ending torture, where he forced himself on her again and again. And Mariano had no patience for the learning curve that would be expected when a young lady raised with privilege, groomed to marry a privileged man and live a privileged life, tumbled from grace and was forced into poverty. Amelia had never had to really do household chores, such as the cooking, the cleaning, or the washing. She'd always had servants who did that for her. And in all fairness, her parents had planned for her to marry a man who would also have the means to employ servants. Maybe Amelia's not sounding like a sympathetic figure to you, but I would like to remind you again, these were different times. Women weren't allowed to go out and make their own money or make their own way in the world. She was a product of her environment. It's not as if she had other options. This was what was expected of her. And if she had attempted to stray from that pre-planned path, she would have been seen as strange or damaged. She would have been pretty much cast out of society. She would have been an embarrassment to her family and to God. And good Catholic families, such as the Dinolfis, They were not going to have that. They weren't giving her any other options. Mariano did not give her time, not even a little time, to pick up on these things, the cleaning, the washing, the cooking. He just beat her violently when she was unable to be proficient immediately at being a wife. And all she could do was take it and try to protect the growing baby in her stomach during these beatings. And when Mariano was done doing whatever he wanted to Amelia, he would leave the house and spend all night at the taverns drinking with his buddies, and sometimes he wouldn't come home all night or even for days. Now, Amelia had no support system. Her old friends wanted nothing to do with her now. She no longer was invited to these high society parties. She no longer attended the ladies' luncheons. She was simply a cautionary tale for all the proper young ladies that she had previously been a part of, that she'd previously been friends with. And the moral of that cautionary tale was, listen, don't sleep with a man before you're married, or you'll turn out like Amelia Dinolfi. Even her own family had written her off. She was married now. She was her husband's problem now. And I'm not going to assign feelings or emotions to anybody, especially people from the 1800s, because they were very different than we are. And also, I don't know them. They can't tell me how they felt. But I assume that they cared about Amelia in some way at one point. But what could they offer her now? They lived in two different worlds, and it was easier to pretend as if she didn't exist than to try to make those complicated class dynamics work. Amelia also didn't get much sympathy from her new social circle. The women and men of her community knew her story. Word got around. I have to speculate that Mariano might have been running around all the town taverns, telling everyone, telling all his buddies, his male buddies, like how awesome it was that he'd raped this woman and then gotten to marry her. And maybe he was telling his friends, like, this is the way to get a great wife. All you have to do is like take her by force, and then her parents will be so afraid of shame and destruction of their reputation that they'll just give her to you. So yeah, word had gotten around her new, social circle, her new community. But they didn't feel bad for her. They had been poor and destitute their whole lives. She'd been born with a silver spoon in her mouth, and she'd messed it all up by dallying with the wrong man and getting pregnant. She was a spoiled little rich girl who hadn't been able to just feel grateful that she'd been born into privilege, and she'd screwed it up. Now she deserved whatever she got. And obviously, to clear this up for everyone out there who likes to jump to conclusions, I'm not saying this is the truth. I'm telling you a story here. So this is what these people thought, which was actually a common thought. If something happened to a woman, if she was raped or assaulted, it was typically her fault. She led him on. I mean, now that I think about it, not much has changed from that time to now as far as that's concerned, has it? Obviously, I don't believe this. I don't believe she deserved what she got. I don't believe that she was at fault. But that's not how most people felt. She had nobody. There was no friends for Amelia to turn to, no shoulders to cry on. And as a result, her heart grew harder as the months went on and the child inside of her grew. And this child would be born on April 18th, 1894, and she would be named Leonarda Chianchuaeli. I would love to tell you a story of hope and happiness where Amelia found comfort in her new child and bonded with her child, finding a light in the darkness that had become her life. I'd like to tell you that Amelia and her new daughter became each other's safe harbor in the storm. But sadly, that's not the story I have for you today. And that's part of what I meant in the introduction when I said it's tough sometimes to tell the good guys from the bad guys. Amelia wasn't born bad, but as it so often goes, the victim became the victimizer. To Amelia, this new baby was the physical representation of all that she had lost. There had already been no time before for small comforts and joy, but now there was this newborn baby who needed constant care and kept Amelia up all night crying. Babies need attention. And maybe Amelia had never even been taught how to be an actual hands-on mother, right? Because usually women of that social stature would have nannies and things to take care of their babies. So it's very likely that Amelia was never taught by her own mother how to be a hands-on mother, how to actually feed and change and do these things and give love and affection. And as life got harder, the resentment inside Amelia towards Leonarda built. Leonarda Chianchuaeli's life was a living hell from the moment she was born. And although she would go on, as we've talked about, to do a lot of terrible things that, we're going to get into, I want you to keep that in mind. Because I believe that people are truly products of their environment and their experiences. So for instance, and this isn't a real life example, but I think it's relevant because I think there are many real life examples such as this. So I was watching the first Hunger Games movie the other night. And at first the movie sort of paints the tributes from District 1 and 2 as the villains of the story, maybe even just as bad as the government figures that are putting the Hunger Games on. Throughout most of the movie, this narrative continues and strengthens, especially with Cato from District 2, who is a complete dick throughout the entire movie. But at the end, when he's facing down Katniss and Peeta, he tells them, I'm paraphrasing here because I don't remember what exactly he says, but he says, "Just kill me. That's what I was raised for, isn't it?" Now, as you know, if you're a fan of the books or movies, which you should be, especially the books, kids in these two districts, District 1 and District 2, are educated to be career tributes. So from the time they are born, they're taught to fight, to survive, to kill, but most importantly, to bring honor to their district. And then when it's their turn to be in the games, they volunteer. So if you're raised to be a killing machine, so you can bring pride to your district, if this is all you hear from day one, all you're told since you can even remember, how do you know to be any other way? How can you be expected to be anything but what you were created to be? Especially when you live in an echo chamber of people around you who are all telling you the same thing. Amelia was taught all her life, you're going to be a grand woman of a grand house. You're going to marry a rich man. You're going to be great. Everything's going to be fine. And you're going to have a great life. When she got pregnant, everybody was telling her, this baby is going to ruin you, right? This is the end of that whole rosy picture we've painted for you your entire life because you got pregnant. Then she, gets into her new life. She's beaten. She's treated like garbage by everybody around her. And she puts two and two together, I was going to have this great life. It was all laid out for me. The only reason I'm not going to have this great life is because I'm pregnant. And now everybody treats me awful and I feel like trash. So A plus B equals C, it's the baby's fault. That's what she thought. And this would also become the case, in my opinion, with her daughter, Leonarda. Amelia was verbally abusive to her daughter. Leonarda was heavily criticized for everything she did. There was no love being given, no acceptance or approval being spoken to her. Everything she did was wrong and bad. She was constantly reminded by her mother, you're the reason my life sucks. And she would also be physically beat for the smallest things. If you think about it, was Amelia wrong for this? Well, yeah, of course she was. But look at her life. Born into money and status, attacked and raped, shunned by her family, forced to marry her rapist. Women in this society had essentially no power. No power to do anything. No voice of their own. When they were young, their parents were their voice. When they were married, their husband was their voice. So Amelia's in this place where she feels incredibly powerless. She has no control over her day-to-day life or her future. She's at the whim of an abusive husband and an unforgiving society. So when her child was born, she saw in her hands someone smaller and more powerless than she was. And she used Leonarda as, for lack of a better term, a punching bag, an outlet for the frustration that she felt, the anger that she felt, because she couldn't take it out on anyone else. Who else was she supposed to yell at? Who else was she supposed to beat? If she did that to her husband, he'd probably kill her and probably not go to jail for it. Leonarda was a child. She was supposed to obey. She was supposed to listen to her mother. Here was someone who was at Amelia's mercy for once instead of the other way around. And Amelia could have broken this cycle by raising her daughter with love and kindness. But what love and kindness had been given to Amelia? What love and kindness had been given to her that she could pass on? When had she ever been shown or taught love and kindness? She was a product of her environment, a product of her circumstance. She was born and bred for one thing and one thing only, and when she couldn't deliver on that thing, she was cast to the side. And so her daughter would also become a victim of her circumstances and her environment. So 3 years after getting married to Mariano with a 2-year-old daughter, moving around from shack to shack because Mariano still didn't have a job, and they were basically living on the charity of the church, who would sometimes give Amelia food and hand-me-down clothing. I mean, they were broke. They were broke. He was a loser, Mariano, and he didn't care as long as he had money to drink. And that's where most of the money he got went. And I also read, where was it that I read this? But I read an article, or it was like, it seemed to be like a newspaper article from a long time ago, where it said he would borrow money from people around town or borrow money from his family, and he never gave it to his own family, Amelia and his daughter Leonarda. He just used it to go drinking. And so one day Mariano just didn't come home. And this wasn't too uncommon, like I said. So Amelia didn't even realize something might be wrong for a few days. And to be honest, in my opinion, it was probably a relief when he wasn't around. But after several days had passed, she picked up little Leonarda and they began roaming the streets, asking people, where Mariano was. And she was eventually directed to the home of one of Mariano's friends, where she found her husband fighting off a high fever and in a deep coma. So with the help of some of Mariano's buddies, who were just hanging around drinking that day, like at this house, Amelia was able to get Mariano back to their house, where she put him in bed. And then she just pretty much forgot that he was there. She didn't forget, right? She knew he was there. She didn't care. Let's call it what it is. She didn't call the doctor. Even if there had been money to pay for a doctor, she wasn't too concerned if Mariano kicked the bucket. So she would let nature take its course. If he woke up, well, that sucked. If he didn't, that would be great, because she'd often dreamed of becoming a widow. And in that dream, there was hope that once her no-good husband was gone from the world, she could re-enter society and find another husband, a better one. She was still young, she still had her looks, and she had a pedigree. She came from good stock. Being a widow with a young child obviously wasn't ideal, but her family name still carried respect in this town. It wouldn't be the marriage that she had dreamed of as a young, naive girl, but it had to be better than what she was living with now. When Leonarda was asked many years later what kind of man her father was, she said she didn't really remember him. He wasn't home much, and she was very young when he finally succumbed to his fever and died. But she did claim to have one memory from his funeral after everyone had left the freshly dug gravesite, and it was just her and her mother staring down at Mariano's grave. Leonarda said that Amelia spat on the mound of earth that covered her husband's casket. And basically, it was like, good riddance, which, I mean, can we really blame her? No, man. That dude was bad news bears. Good riddance for sure. After Mariano was gone, Amelia was under the impression that it would be as if the last 3 years had never happened. She had felt that it was Mariano that had driven her into the dirt. And now that he wasn't a factor any longer, her family would welcome her and her daughter back with open arms and help put her back on the market so a more suitable man could come and scoop her up and ride away into the sunset with her. Well, this didn't happen, because even if it had been Mariano who drove Amelia into the dirt, as a result, she had quite a bit of dirt on her. And ironic as it was, Amelia's family looked down on her because she'd married beneath her station. I guess they too had forgotten the last 3 years had happened. I guess they forgot that it had been their Machiavellian plans that had found Amelia married to someone below her station. Like, that was your fault. You made her do that. But as far as they were concerned, Amelia no longer belonged in the world of their grand houses, their high society friends. It was too risky to bring her back now. Her previous scandal and marriage hadn't marred their reputation too badly, but bringing her back, reminding people that it had happened, it could potentially raise the old rumors from the grave, and they couldn't have that. So they rejected her and Leonarda and pretended she didn't exist. So Amelia was truly on her own now. Once she realized no help would be forthcoming from the Dinolfis, Amelia set her sights a bit lower, not in high society, but not in her own lower social status either. She thought, she could bag herself a decent middle-class man, maybe a widower, who would be interested in having a pretty young wife on his arm. And this pretty young wife had been trained in all the ways of a high society lady, so he would benefit. And in truth, she did find many men that were interested in spending time with her due to her looks and her charming ways, but these men still saw her for what she was in their society, a widow with a child who had nothing, too much baggage for a legitimate marriage. They took her out, they gave her compliments, but she was not wife material to them. She was a way to have a fun time and to sow their wild oats before they settled down in a marriage with a respectable woman. So once Amelia realized that none of these men were ever going to propose to her, she sort of took up with the wrong crowd. These were men who, I guess, technically did have money. They dressed in fancy suits and they showered her with gifts, but they might have gotten their money from illegal avenues. This was the late 1890s. These men very well could have been involved in organized crime, which was on the rise in Italy at that time and further on. I mean, even today, didn't they just make a huge arrest or send a bunch of people to trial in Italy? I think I heard it on the news today. Maybe it was Philip DeFranco I was listening to, but a bunch of people, I forget how much it was, but I'm going to say 100, don't quote me. A bunch of people were brought up on charges of organized crime in Italy just this week while I'm recording this. And in 1986, in the area where Amelia grew up in, 31 people who were involved with the Graziano clan were convicted of organized crime charges in Avellino. So I do believe that these men she was dating were probably involved in organized crime. They were not only common criminals, but they were also probably pretty dangerous or were at least connected to people who were dangerous. But at the very least, they were definitely, smooth-talking con men. So Amelia married another man who I guess had the appearance of being well off. He lavished her with gifts and money. He bought her fine clothes, stuff that probably fell off the back of a truck. Think Tony Soprano meets Tommy Shelby. He also drove a really nice car. He went to the big city for dinner. He didn't stay in the small towns. But this guy, he was also the definition of an easy come, easy go kind of man, meaning he could make money fast, but he could spend it as fast as he made it. There was no saving happening. There was no security promised for the future of Amelia and her child. And Leonarda herself became an afterthought to both her mother and her new stepfather. In his eyes, Leonarda was excess baggage, the price he had to pay to get to the mother, and he paid very little attention to her. As had been the routine for years, whenever Amelia did pay attention to Leonarda, it was negative and abusive attention, even after she was happily married to this dude. I mean, Amelia knew that this new husband, it wasn't her perfect match, It wasn't the marriage that would set her up for a comfortable life. She wasn't dumb, but she didn't care at that point. She felt pretty and special once again. She was getting fancy things from her new husband, and he took her out to dinner and dancing all night while little Leonarda was left at home, sometimes with no dinner, sometimes with just scraps from whatever she could find around the house, while her mother and her mother's husband dined out at these fancy restaurants, having steak dinners, essentially. It pisses me off. And I mean, they usually wouldn't get home until the very early hours of the morning. So at this time, I estimate that Leonarda couldn't have been more than 5 or 6 when her mother remarried. So she's left alone pretty much all day, all night. She's got to get her own food. She's got to put herself to bed. For the most part, she was taking care of herself. The pivotal and important years when a child should be shown love, when a child should be having their needs met by a caregiver, she was alone. And whenever her mother was around, she spent the little time that they had together reminding Leonarda how much she was hated, how much she'd ruined her mother's life. Now, there's 2 types of attachment bonds that form between a child and a caregiver, secure and insecure. A secure attachment bond ensures that the child will feel, secure, understood, and calm enough to experience optimal development of their nervous system. A secure bond instills a feeling of safety in a young child, and this feeling of safety allows them to feel secure enough to venture out into the world, to learn new things, to have a healthy sense of self, to develop things like empathy for others and the ability to trust other people. So, for instance, when, a child's a baby and they cry, their caregiver responds. When a child says they're hungry, they're given food. When a child is scared, they're given reassurance that everything's okay. There's no monsters under your bed. I'm here. I'll take care of you. I'll protect you. On the other hand, an insecure attachment bond stems from failing to meet a child's need for security, understanding, and calm, and this prevents their young and developing brain from organizing itself in the best way. And this can obviously lead to issues with emotional, mental, and even physical development, as well as, and I think this is obvious, the ability to form healthy relationships later in life. Babies don't have the tools to soothe themselves, so if a baby's left to cry all day and all night, or a child is left in an abusive or tumultuous home, they will come to see the world as a scary and unpredictable place. They will grow up to feel a sense of being out of control all the time, a sense of being scared all the time. And obviously, this can lead to a lot of issues. Now, as we talk about Leonarda and her experiences in life, it's pretty clear to see that this was a child who was never given reassurances that everything would be all right. Leonarda first attempted to take her own life at the age of 13. She fashioned a noose using her bed sheets and tried to hang herself from the ceiling rafters, but the knots came loose and she fell. For a week after, she couldn't speak because she had crushed her larynx. And in an autobiography that she later wrote, she claimed her mother didn't even notice. Amelia didn't notice that her daughter was unable to speak. Amelia didn't notice the marks left from this attempt at her life, the bruises on her throat, the bruises on her body from crashing to the ground. And this illustrates how little attention Amelia paid to Leonarda. Leonarda's second suicide attempt was less than a year later when she tried to hang herself again, but failed again. Inwardly, Leonarda was in a constant state of agony and sadness and depression. But outwardly, as the years passed, this was not evident to everyone. What was evident to everyone was that she was growing into a lovely young woman who had been blessed with her mother's looks. As this happened, Amelia also began to pay attention to Leonarda, finally seeing some value in her. Amelia looked at her daughter and realized that if she played her cards right, she could land herself a good husband, not just good for, their current situation, not just like a man from around there, but from the upper class. Amelia knew that a good match for Leonarda would improve all of their lives because it was common that a daughter's husband, if he was well off and wealthy and had high social status, he would take care of his new wife's parents. He would make sure that they never went without. Leonarda was beautiful, she was young, and she came from the Dinolfi line. And even though her mother had fallen out of high society's favor, Leonarda wasn't Amelia. She had a chance. So Amelia began putting on her best clothes, doing herself up, and slipping back into the grand airs of her childhood, and she ventured back into that world that had rejected her so many years before. This time, not as a woman on the marriage market, but as the mother of a young lady who would be valued on that market. And she was right. The same doors that had been slammed in her face before were now opened. She was invited in by the mothers of respectable men who wanted their sons to marry a young and attractive woman who had a pure lineage and who would give them beautiful grandchildren. Being a Dinolfi woman still meant something in Montella, and Amelia was going to ride it all the way to the bank. Now, there was two problems with this plan. Firstly, Amelia didn't really consider Leonarda to be a person. She never had given much thought to her before, and she didn't even think to inform her daughter of this plan. She never told Leonarda she was on the prowl for a good suitor, not because it was a secret, but simply because she just didn't think to do it. So imagine, you have a dog and you're thinking to yourself like, oh, my dog needs to get shots at the vet. Do you go and tell your dog before you call the vet, like, hey, dude, do you want to get your shots? Like, is it a good time for you? Do you have plans this coming Wednesday? No. You just call the vet and you make the appointment, and then you tell your dog when you're bringing your dog to the vet what's happening, which is sad. It's a sad time. To Amelia, Leonarda was a doll that stared vacantly at a wall until her mother walked in and the doll suddenly came to life. Now, the second issue was that Amelia was really enjoying her time spent searching for Leonarda's husband. She got many offers right away. Like, many men were interested in being suitors of Leonarda's. But, she didn't take any of them at this point. She was having way too much fun playing the part of high society lady again. She was suddenly receiving invitations to, the ladies' luncheons again. She was in high demand and respected again. And, she didn't want that to end too quickly. And young Leonarda, fast approaching the age of adulthood, was also looking for a husband on her own. She thought that getting married was the only way out of the fiery hell pit she'd been living in for so long. But while Amelia was browsing through what she considered to be the cream of the crop, Leonarda was falling in love with a simple and kind older man named Raphael Panzari, who worked as a low-paid government clerk. He didn't come from wealth and privilege, but he was hardworking and responsible. He treated Leonarda with respect, and she saw that at least their future together would be stable and steady. And this stability was something she craved, something she had never had. And it was good enough for Leonarda. Anything was better than living with her negligent, abusive mother and clueless stepfather. So when Raphael proposed to Leonarda, of course she said yes. And then she went to, happily tell her mother, like, I'm in love, I'm getting married. And Amelia's response was, I guess, maybe not what Leonarda was expecting, even though I feel like she probably should have expected it. Amelia was livid. But get this, Amelia still did not tell Leonarda that she'd been pounding the pavement trying to set her up in like this really good marriage. So you'd think that would occur to Amelia to say, like, no, don't marry this guy because, whatever, you love him, but I have many better prospects for you that are going to make you wealthy, that are going to get all of us out of this bad situation. No, Amelia did not do that because she thought that Leonarda should just obey as she always had. So she just told Leonarda, if you marry this man, like, I'll never approve of it. I'll never support it. And since Leonarda didn't know that Amelia had a plethora of other options, she sort of just assumed her mother was trying to just keep torturing her, just trying to prevent her from escaping the household so that she could continue to ensure Leonarda would never be happy, would never be free. She was like, this lady just wants to keep me here so she can yell at me all the time and use me as a punching bag. So Leonarda told Amelia, I am going to marry Raphael. And at this point, her mother did not yell or scream. She did not throw things or physically attack her daughter. She simply made a calm and chilling promise, a curse, if you will. She cursed Leonarda and said, you will live a miserable life until the day you die. And those were the last words Amelia uttered to her daughter. And after that, she never spoke to her again. She didn't attend the wedding, and if she ever saw Leonarda on the street or at the market, she acted as if they were complete strangers. Now, the thing about this curse was that it did have a great power over Leonarda. She had been raised to believe in things like curses, the supernatural, rituals, things like that. Most people in Italy at this time were Roman Catholic, so the idea of an afterlife was always very prevalent. The idea that good people went to heaven and bad people went to hell, it was not like this, possibility or this thing that you just think about. It was a certainty. Like that's what they believed, and that's what obviously still people do believe. I'm not saying that people don't believe in that today. People do believe in that today. Additionally, the Romani people had been living in Italy since the 15th century, and due to their presence in the country, many of their beliefs and traditions did become a part of Italian culture. Now, the Romani people had been persecuted for centuries, not necessarily because of their belief system, at least not at first, but mainly due to the fact that they had darker skin, and because of their constant vilification, they became nomadic out of necessity. They had to constantly move around, constantly go from place to place to avoid imprisonment, sometimes even death, since in many countries, like England, for example, being Romani was illegal and punishable by death. So, the Romani people, they were moving around from town to town, city to city. And because of the fact that they never really could settle in any place because the people in that area didn't want them to. I mean, let's be honest. The people in that area didn't want them to because they had a bad stigma attached to them. They were not able to get, real jobs. They weren't able to settle down, have a career, get a good paying job. And this was another reason why they had to constantly move around because they couldn't really afford to do anything else. Now, according to a book I read about Leonardo Chianchuaeli called The Curse by Ryan Green, there are also 3 types of Italian folk magic that were being practiced at this time in Italy: Stregaria, Stregonaria, and Benedicaria. According to the website Stragaria.com, Stragaria and Straganaria both refer to witchcraft, but there's some differences. Straganaria has a more negative connotation. It's thought to be more malevolent, often practiced to inflict harm. Straganaria also seems to have been a form of sorcery that dates back to before Christianity. So when the Catholic Church was formed, Straganaria became outlawed, but it did survive in some forms well into the 17th century. And those who practiced it would hide it in plain sight, disguising it within the rituals and rites of the Catholic Church, which is very common for pagan religions. This is really actually a thing I've discovered. And eventually, it kind of became replaced by Christian beliefs mixed with Italian folk magic. So it kind of got watered down, sort of, from its original form. Now, Straganaria is an archaic word for witchcraft, and it is a pagan-oriented religious system with a magical structure for rituals and spells. And just as a quick side note, if anyone's interested in learning more about Italian folk magic, I did pick up an incredible book called Italian Folk Magic, Rue's Kitchen Witchery by Mary Grace Faroon, and I highly recommend it. I learned so much from it about what it meant in the past and what it still means to many people today. And there's actually some great traditional Italian recipes in there as well that I can't wait to try out, like a nice brodo, like did you cook all day on the stove? But it seems that in general, the general consensus amongst people who practice this or historians who have studied or people that believe in it is that Straganaria usurped and distorted the pre-existing tradition of witchcraft when it mixed with Christianity, and Stragaria stayed pure and true to its pagan roots. Straganaria was the really old one before Christianity that sort of got watered down and mixed in with Christianity. Stragera is the more pure, pagan-rooted form that people still practice today and take a lot of pride in. And then that third one, the practice called Benedicaria, this can also be traced back to the Roman Empire, and it can be found mostly in southern Italy and Sicily. And Benedicaria revolves a lot around ancestral worship as well as household gods. This practice is mostly concerned with family-based folk traditions passed down over the generations, and it almost exclusively focuses on healing, cleansing, spirituality, and religious devotion. So they're very different, right? But what I'm trying to illustrate, breaking all of these down for you, is not only because, I learned something, so now I want you to, but also some of these practices may not have always been considered socially acceptable. But even though they weren't, they were still passed down, usually from mother to daughter, and sometimes practiced in secrecy, depending on the time and also the location. So if you were in a bigger city, you would try to hide this more. But if you were in kind of like the outskirts and smaller villages in the countryside, it was more like kind of a well-kept secret or a well-kept secret. Italian folk magic would have been a big part of Leonarda's upbringing, whether through her mother or from the other women in the village or from the Romani people who were passing through. It would have been a part of normal life, of their culture. So she would not have taken her mother's curse lightly. Leonarda's already fragile mental state from a childhood of neglect and abuse, combined with her true belief in the power of curses, this is a toxic cocktail. It would have become pervasive for her, and in a way, it would almost thrust her towards a self-fulfilling prophecy that would follow her for the rest of her days. At first, the curse was just a shadow that clung to her everywhere she went. For the first few years as a married woman, Leonarda devoted herself wholeheartedly, almost obsessively, to being the best wife and homemaker possible. According to author Ryan Green, in the absence of Amelia's harsh and critical voice, Leonarda became her own toughest critic. And what else could you expect? When your perception of normalcy is always being told that you aren't good enough, it will become a personal mantra of sorts. I'm not good enough. Leonarda's husband, Raphael, he was a really good man. He did not understand his wife's need to be perfect. He didn't understand when she had a meltdown every time she burnt his dinner or whenever she could not complete her household chores for the day. He was not critical of her. He was understanding and loving towards her. He told her, just relax. It's good. We're in this together. But she was incredibly critical of herself. And every day she pushed herself to the brink of what was physically and humanly possible for her to do, and she ended up in tears more often than not. Raphael also noticed that Leonarda always seemed afraid of everything. She made mountains out of molehills. And no matter how proficient she became at something, no matter how immaculate she did something, she considered it a failure. She considered herself a failure, and she said, I can do better. I should do better. And this is a personality characteristic that comes into play later during Leonarda's crimes. At some point, her health began failing, and she began to experience violent fits and seizures. When she wasn't in the throes of that, she was constantly nervous and anxious, and she had trouble sleeping at night because her mind raced around. More than anything, Leonarda wanted to be perfect in her role as a wife so that she would one day be the perfect mother when she had children, which she had started trying to do from the moment she got married. She badly wanted children, a big family. She wanted to be a mother, have many children that she could love, and in return, who would love her. And you do often see this as well in children from abusive homes. They will sometimes say they want to be a parent, not to pass on the cycle of abuse, but almost to go in the other direction. They just want somebody who will love them unconditionally. And they think that a child is the only one who will do that. All right, so this traveling fair came to her village, and, Leonarda heard that there were Romani fortune tellers there. So she obviously goes there because she's into this kind of stuff, into getting her fortune told, believes in the supernatural, believes that she's legitimately cursed by her mother. So even before allowing this Romani fortune teller to look at her hands, Leonarda was like, listen, let me break it down for you, okay? I'm cursed. My mother cursed me, so don't be alarmed by what you see, essentially. And then she stretched her arms out to the palm reader, and she asked, am I going to die? The palm reader inspected Leonarda's palms for a while. Her eyes ran along her love line, her heart line, her head line, but then they paused at her fate line. And the Romani fortune teller said, you are not going to die for a long time, but you will live a long life of sadness and outlive all of your children. So this was obviously the worst possible news that Leonarda could ever have expected. And this window into her fate, or what the fortune teller told her fate was going to be, it overlapped with her mother's curse in her mind until they kind of became one in the same. Now, she had been trying to get pregnant since becoming married, and she'd had no luck. She had originally been attributing her lack of fertility to, her own shortcomings as a wife and as a woman, the shortcomings she perceived she had, I should say. But now she wondered if it was more magical than physical. What if it was this curse? What if her mother had known that having children was what was going to make Leonarda happy? Having children and being a good wife would make her happy. So she was like, I'm going to make sure I curse you, and you're never going to be as good of a wife as you want to be, and you're never going to have children. Well, finally, 3 years after getting married, Leonarda became pregnant for the first time. And from the moment she realized she was with child, her anxiety began to build. And this rising anxiety triggered more seizures, more fits, even causing her to fall down and hurt herself sometimes. She sensed this new life growing inside of her, and she knew she had to protect it from the curse in the outside world at all costs. But she also felt she had no control over not only, her body due to the seizures, but also her fate, which seemed to have already been laid out for her by her mother and the Romani fortune teller. 3 months later, she lost this baby. And as devastating as this was, it only reinforced to her belief that the curse and what it would mean for her and her future and her children was real. At this point, Raphael was working steadily, but he found himself unable to get a promotion or advance at work. So, he knew that he wanted to make more money and make a better life for his family. Maybe making more money, putting Leonarda in a more comfortable house, maybe it would reduce her stress and she would feel better. At this point, Leonarda's health was so bad that she could sometimes not even leave her bed for fear of having a seizure and hurting herself from a fall. So she couldn't possibly find a job to contribute, even if there had been a ton of options for women to work, which there were not. So in 1920, the couple decided to leave Montella in search of better prospects. And over the next several months, they moved often, always searching for a good and simple life, a decent paying job for Raphael. They didn't want much, but they had no luck. They kind of did farm work here and there, sort of, like going around to different farms asking if these farmers needed help. And you do that for a couple of days, get paid, and then move on. But in 1921, Raphael and Leonarda ended up settling in Raphael's native town of Laria in the province of Potenza in the south of Italy near Calabria. Their new home had a nice warm climate. It was so pretty. It was beautiful. Raphael was able to find a job quickly and easily, and they'd made enough in the past year from taking these farm jobs to put a deposit down on a nice little house. Additionally, another added benefit was that Raphael's family lived there. That's where he was born. That's where he was from. They were close by. And soon after arriving, Leonarda was pregnant again. But this time, she had two things that she'd never had before. She had stability and the love and support of an extended family. And this time, her pregnancy was an easy one, and Leonarda found her anxiety almost vanishing as she proudly kept her little home and sent her husband off to work every day with a kiss goodbye. With this new positive mindset, even Leonarda could admit that things were looking up. And hundreds of miles away from Montella, her mother's curse seemed to be something silly and distant, just words from an angry, bitter woman. Leonarda's miracle baby was born in 1922. It was a son, and she named him Giuseppe. She thought he was absolutely perfect, and just as she had been driven to be the perfect wife, she now felt the same frenzied obsession to be the perfect mother. Leonarda herself may have been a representation of something dark to her mother when she had been born, but to her, Giuseppe was a symbol of hope and new beginnings. Away from her mother and her past, starting a family of her own with extended family around who loved her son, and would care for her. If she was truly cursed, fate would never have allowed her to bring such a beautiful baby boy into the world, since he brought her so much happiness. Unfortunately, Giuseppe also brought Leonarda's anxiety back, not by any fault of his own, he was a baby, but simply because she felt this oppressive need to protect him and keep him safe at all costs, at all times. And this was a 24/7 kind of job, right? Every time he fussed, she was there. And she was like, is he sick? Does he have a fever? What's going on? If he cried, she worried that he'd contracted some fatal illness. At night, when he was sleeping peacefully, she would continually hover over his cradle to make sure he was still breathing. And I'm talking like all night, not just once in a while, because we've all done that as parents, right? We've all wanted to make sure our kids are still breathing at night. I think this is normal. She would go in there like every 5 minutes and even sometimes move him and shake him awake if she didn't think that she could see him breathing. And this constant stress and worry brought her seizures back, which added to her anxiety. Now, it was true that she and Raphael were surviving. They were getting by, but he wasn't making enough money at work to actually save for the future. And now that Giuseppe was here, Leonarda was very, very much concerned with this future. But due to her seizures, which had been coming back since the birth of Giuseppe, she was unable to secure a job. Through all of these ups and downs, she was still clinging to the hope that her mother's curse had been a bunch of nonsense and that no demons had followed her to her new life. She had successfully given birth to a healthy baby boy, and if she could do it once, she could do it a dozen times, or so she thought. Over the next several years, Leonarda would become pregnant 16 more times, 17 pregnancies in all. After her first miscarriage, she would lose 2 more babies in the womb, but she did give birth to 14 of these babies. Unfortunately, 10 of these children died far before they were adults. 7 of them actually died before the age of 3. So it's starting to become very easy to see how Leonarda would go on to strongly believe that she truly was cursed to live a miserable life and outlive her precious children. These experiences would have been incredibly difficult for anybody. But on top of what Leonarda had already gone through in her life, what she was now going through, her physical issues, her, actual health, this all was devastating to her mental health. After giving birth to Giuseppe, when Leonarda got pregnant again shortly after and lost this child, her seizures continued stronger than ever before, and her once positive outlook quickly darkened. She was a loving and attentive mother to all of her children, however, and when she became the mother of 2 girls and a little boy in quick succession, she felt, she might have bested the curse. Maybe it had gotten tired of her and moved on. Maybe it felt that it had made her miserable enough that she'd lost enough. But then each of these children got sick, one after the other. The little girl was born with bad lungs. Her illness started with a small cough here and there and quickly grew to extended coughing spells that kept her up all night. And Leonarda stayed up all night, holding her little daughter in her arms, propping her up so that she could breathe easier, singing to her, stroking her hair. But this little girl would inevitably die. Then her little boy developed a rash that no one could explain, and one night as he slept in his crib, he also passed away. The doctors could never say why. Leonarda became paralyzed with grief and terror. She became a helicopter mother, never letting any of her surviving children out of her sight because she felt if she wasn't watching over them and protecting them every minute of every day, something bad would happen. She was especially worried for her first child, Giuseppe, her miracle baby, the one closest to her heart. As he grew into a toddler and then a young boy, Leonardo refused to let him go outside and play with the other children, and she continued to fuss over the smallest things, the normal things that would happen to a young and active boy. Bumps and bruises would send Leonarda into a panic attack. The common cold, she would think he, developed pneumonia and was about to die. Raphael and his family tried to help Leonarda, but they were confused. They were trying to understand what she was going through, and it wasn't difficult to understand that it would be very traumatic for her, especially after she lost her two children, her son and her daughter, to mysterious illnesses within such a short time. And so obviously they understood why she would worry for the health of her living children, but she literally refused to leave the side of her kids. She didn't feel like they would be safe with anyone else. But the harsh reality was any amount of children meant that more resources were needed to support them, which meant that Leonarda was going to have to get over whatever it was she was going through and get a job. Finally, Raphael was able to convince her to take an overnight cleaning job at the village bank. He had actually been able to secure her this job due to his respect and good standing in the community. He was known to be a hard worker, so they were like, well, if he's a hard worker, he'll make sure she is too. And he kind of, made, I guess, a compromise with her. Raphael told Leonarda, you can watch the kids all day. You can watch them like a hawk all day. And then you can put them to bed and go to the bank late at night after everybody else has gone home and clean. And I'll be home with them and they'll just be sleeping. What's the worst that could happen? And even Leonarda could not deny that they needed more money. They needed more resources. And the bank job was actually a really good fit for her at first. She didn't have much time or desire to socialize. She was very introverted. And in the quiet bank at night, she could be alone. She could do her duties and not have to worry about anybody talking to her. And she could have this task of taking this disorganized, dirty building and setting it right again, something that's very satisfying for people with anxiety, something that was very satisfying for her. She even enjoyed learning about different chemicals that were used for cleaning and mixing them together to create different formulations that were more effective. And this will come into play later as well. And she kept this routine going for a while, and it seemed to be good for her. It seemed to be good for the family. The only problem was, although Leonarda was making a wage, it wasn't enough to save. Once again, it was just enough to sort of provide for their growing family as they were, not enough to stow away for an unpredictable future. And then the worst possible thing that could have happened. While Leonarda was at work one night, another of her children died in his sleep. It was her 10th child to have been born, the 10th child to have been held in his or her mother's arms, and the 10th child to have passed away, just not be there anymore, to have to be buried in a pauper's grave. Raphael and his family could not bring themselves to actually go to the bank when this happened, where Leonarda worked, and break this news to her. They just kind of wanted to give her a few more hours apiece, and I think that they suspected once she got this news, whatever, leaps or even small steps she'd taken in getting her better in her mental health, it would probably be a backslide. So they wanted to give her a few more hours where she could take something dirty and make it clean, where she could feel as if she had control over her surroundings. And when she arrived home and found out she would be burying another child, something inside of her broke. Leonarda came to feel that the only thing that would make her life and her family's life better was money. With money, she could afford to move her family to the countryside where there was plenty of fresh air and less disease. She could afford to, pay for doctors, bring doctors to the house when her kids got sick so that they could hopefully get better. And, she kind of felt like fate was offering her an opportunity to get money, considering that She worked at a bank. Now, of course, she was the cleaning lady. She couldn't get into the safes or the bank vaults or things like that. But she did have access to the bank ledger. And, maybe she could make a few small changes in the bank ledger and make it look like she had an account with them that had money in it. And that's exactly what Leonarda did. She created a fake bank account with a, hefty amount of money in it. But then when she tried to go to the bank and withdraw this fake money from this fake account, they were like, really? You thought that this would work? And she was promptly arrested, charged with fraud, and sentenced to 1.5 years in prison. In 1927, Leonarda arrived at her new home, the prison. And this wasn't a real prison because there just weren't as many women criminals in Italy at this time as there were men. And obviously they can't mix the two. You can't put men and women prisoners together. So the women would usually be sent to what they called reformatories, and they were usually controlled by the church. Arguably, these places were sometimes worse than traditional prisons, because at least these traditional prisons would have some standards for how the prisoners would be treated and people kind of like overseeing this. Leonarda was housed at an old nunnery run by a mother superior, and a bunch of other nuns. And she and the other women were basically at the whims of these nuns that controlled their every waking moment. The women would be expected to behave, stay quiet, never step out of line, work their fingers to the bone for free, and if they ever did anything other than all of the above, the nuns would arbitrarily add years onto their sentence with no one to really keep track or regulate. Luckily, Leonarda was used to making herself small and quiet, having lived with an angry, domineering woman for the majority of her life, so she kept her head down, she did as she was told, and she kept out of trouble and was released after her 18-month sentence into the care of her husband. Unfortunately, the situation in Laria was not how she had left it. Everything had gone to hell. Raphael had lost his job after she'd pulled her bank stunt, and even his family were feeling like kind of embarrassed about their connection to him and his convict wife. The entire community had rejected them, and they'd made it pretty clear that they didn't want Leonarda, Raphael, and their kids living in Laria after she was released. Raphael's family, they loved them still, they were embarrassed and they were like, ugh, this sucks, but they still wanted to help out. So they collected as much money as they could to give to the young family, but they also made it clear, it's probably best that you move on and start fresh somewhere other than Laria. Raphael, Leonarda, and their remaining children continued south before settling in Lacedonia in the Campania region. Once again, here things began to look up, and this is a really beautiful area. I keep saying, see what I'm saying? Every place in Italy is beautiful. Raphael got a good clerical job so that he was making enough money to allow Leonarda to stay home and care for her children and watch them every second. And they were able to rent this adorable, sweet little house that overlooked the Osento River. It was a picturesque place, quaint and friendly, and the children were very happy there because there was lots of outdoor space for them to run around and play in under the watchful eyes of their mother, of course. Even Leonarda eventually found herself relaxing, getting up in the morning and going through her daily routines and duties without the familiar, heavy anxiety crushing her lungs and her heart. But then she got pregnant again and her peace was shattered. Leonarda was always waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the curse to show itself in whatever wicked way it decided to do so. But in her experience, over, the last couple of years, she realized that the curse usually struck her where it really hurt, through her children. Before she gave birth, Leonarda and little Giuseppe visited the Romani people that had set up camp in the woods near her home. She'd heard word around town that a very gifted fortune teller was living at the camp. And Leonarda wanted her palm read again. She wanted her fortune told again to see if her fates had changed or if she should still expect the worst. Leonarda was told by the fortune teller that in one hand, she could see prison, and in the other hand, she could see a mental asylum. So, I guess it's subjective, but that seems pretty bad. Doesn't feel like this was the kind of news you would want to receive if you already thought you were doomed by a powerful curse to live life in misery. The mental asylum especially terrified Leonarda because as far as she knew, those who went into asylums were never seen again. And no one really knew what went on behind their doors. It was kind of like this mystery, but she knew enough to know it wasn't good. And she was right. Mental asylums in those days were nothing more than buildings to just store these poor people that, no one understood and then just let them live in their own squalor. But then Leonarda gave birth to a child, a healthy baby boy, who Leonarda kind of looked at with a little bit of suspicion, like, this is too good to be true. I don't deserve this. She just didn't understand it. She figured that although this child had been born and he seemed healthy, he'd surely die, like the others. And as a result, she did care for him like a mother would, but she cared for him almost in a distanced way, like she didn't want to get too close to this child. Additionally, her seizures had come back, and there would be times when she was too afraid to pick her son up for fear that, a fit would come at her when she didn't expect it, and she would drop him and hurt him or kill him. So this is really sad. This woman had seen so many children born and then die that she sort of raised this child as if he was going to die, as if it was a foregone conclusion. And I've heard a lot of stories and I've read a lot of books about the olden days, especially the times during the bubonic plague. And that was also a symptom of living during plague times. Parents would have children and they just kind of would never get emotionally attached to them because it was more than likely they wouldn't live long. And I can't even begin to imagine the impact that this had on Leonarda's mental health. Every night after her husband got home from work and she had put the kids to bed, Leonarda would leave the house and then just kind of start walking. And she never knew when she left the house exactly where she was going to go. Yet every single night she ended up at the same place, the Romani camp in the woods. Now, over the next several months, Leonarda would spend a lot of time with the Romani people. And even after this, for a good majority of her life, she was very close with the Romani people, and she'd eventually almost become an unofficial part of their community. They accepted her. At first, she would just have her fortune told, her palm read, but eventually she began asking questions, about their rituals and about their history and their culture, and they shared their knowledge with her. Leonarda began purchasing books about fortune-telling, tarot, the occult, and she became obsessed with trying to find some way to reverse or break the curse that had been placed on her. She learned how to read palms from the Romani, she learned about astrology and horoscopes, but no matter who she talked to, what she read, or how long she looked up into the stars, Leonarda could not find anything concrete that told her how to escape what she now believed was her certain fate. They hadn't been in Lacedonia long when the month of July brought the wheat harvest, and this was a huge community event. No matter your age, your social standing, or your occupation, when the harvest came around, everyone left their homes and their workplaces, and they gathered in the fields in the hills. And then for the next several days, even longer sometimes, they would work side by side with their family and their neighbors to harvest the crops. When the sun went down, there would be bonfires, music, food, and dancing, and everybody would hang out and have a great time. It was like this week-long festival almost. People actually really looked forward to it, and it sounds awesome. And then everyone would just find a spot in the dirt, on the ground, and they would sleep beneath the stars out in the wheat fields, satisfyingly exhausted after a very long and fun day of hard work and play. And this is where Leonarda and her family were in the early morning hours of July 23rd, 1930, when an earthquake began to make the land roll like it was a wave in an ocean. The Irpina earthquake is what it was called, and it hit hard with a surface wave magnitude of 6.6 and a maximum intensity of X, which is considered to be very destructive. And that's exactly what this earthquake was, incredibly destructive. The epicenter of this massive earthquake was the town of Lacedonia, which was completely obliterated, while most of its inhabitants slumbered in the nearby field, which is coincidentally what ended up saving the majority of their lives and keeping the death toll pretty low for such a really horrific earthquake. But that's not how Leonarda saw it. She wasn't like, oh, good thing my family and I were in the fields and we didn't get taken out. She was woken up by the sound of destruction. And all her and her family and her community, they gathered together and they watched the homes and the lives that they had loved and found peace in and created and built completely just wiped off the face of the earth, as if none of it had ever existed at all. Now, Lacedonia was the one place that Leonarda had kind of allowed herself to truly let her guard down and feel really happy for once. She'd found companionship and friendship among the Romani people. She had thought, I think we can truly be happy here for the long run. But now she knew, or thought she knew, that there was no peace, there was no happiness. Her mother's curse would follow her to the ends of the earth, and she would never be free of it, unless she could find a way to become powerful enough to snuff it out of existence. And if she ever wanted to be free, that's exactly what she would have to do. And that is where we will end part 1. Part 2 has a lot more in store for you, trust me. And I really appreciate you guys giving this video a chance if you're here, because so many times, if it seems like it's something old or not like relevant from today, people won't watch. They'll be like, this isn't true crime. But listen, Leonarda Chianchuaeli is a part of true crime history. She is an infamous serial killer. And I think it's important to, examine the past as well as today. So don't forget to check out the description box where you will find many important things, such as the links to my glasses from Glasses USA. I highly recommend that if you're a glasses wearer, Glasses USA will be your new fun playground, because there's so many beautiful glasses and they're so affordable. And I mean, one day maybe I'll start wearing contact lenses so that I can record without worrying about glare and shadows and stuff. But I don't know. I really like my glasses. They become like a part of me now. So I don't know. Maybe I can wear contact lenses and then glasses with no lenses in them, so there's no glare, but there would still be a shadow. Ugh, it's hard. But anyways, I highly suggest that if you're looking for glasses, you should check out GlassesUSA.com, because it will save you a lot of money and time. And you'll find the links to the glasses I talked about in this video in the description box. Also in the description box, you will find social media handles for Twitter and Instagram. Follow me there. You will also find the links to the 2 books I used to research this case, which I referred to in this video. The one about Italian folk magic and the one by Ryan Green called The Curse. And you will also find the link to my podcast that I co-host with retired police detective Derek Levasseur, Crime Weekly. New episodes come out every Friday. So if you haven't checked it out yet, you should go and do that. We've been having a lot of fun recording these, researching these. I'm learning so much from Derek about law enforcement and procedures and stuff like that. So it's actually really beneficial for me. And I'm just really enjoying the whole process and learning how a podcast works. So check it out. Support your girl. I appreciate you guys so much. Don't forget to let me know what you think in the comment section. I'm very interested to kind of get a gauge on what people feel about this so far. Also, share the video if you think it's worth sharing. Like it if you liked it. And if you're not subscribed yet, you should definitely subscribe, because we have a great community here. We love each other. We have a great time. And if you are already subscribed, just make sure you still are, because YouTube unsubscribes people from my channel all the time. I don't know why. It just happens. I'm not sure why. But I love you guys so much. Stay kind, stay beautiful, and I'll see you very soon. Bye.
Straight down, and that river runs deep, the mountains get steep, and the voices getting too loud. All these feelings I've buried, it's looking like a cemetery. They're coming back from the grave, calling out my name, better say a Hail Mary. Well, you don't know how deep it goes until it's killing you slowly. And so you got to let it go. I got blood.